Welcome back to another endgame strategy video. So today I want to talk about one pawn up endgames and the transition into pawn endgames. So you see this position on move 26 that I played in an online game, and I'm up a pawn here, this very nice passed e pawn, and still a lot is on the board. And now I want to show you one way of winning this position that I found in this game. And that I analyzed a little bit. I think it's very interesting, these kinds of positions where you up one pawn and you kind of try to transition into an endgame that is winning for you with this one pawn extra. So what I played is knight c6 here, challenging this knight, and you see this knight is in a very awkward position in the game, because if the knight moves, for instance, takes on c6, then rook f1 double check, this cover check from the queen and the rook, which is also protected by the own rook. So king has to go to h8 and h2 and then queen g1 checkmate. So this is the problem after knight c6. You can't really move the knight. Queen e3 defends the knight. And now knight takes d4. There are other ways to win this game, but I want to talk about the simplification now, because that's one of the key topics here. You want to trade off the knights, then the queens and the rooks, if possible. And if you simplify enough, you get a winning pawn endgame with being up this very nice pass pawn. So rook takes d4, rook from 2 to f4. Now the rook is very nasty, pinned on d4. The queen is hanging behind, so the rook can't really move. Rook from b to d1. And now rook takes d4, rook takes d4. Sometimes it's not that easy to simplify things, but I just want to show you the pattern that, you know, if you can simplify into a winning pawn endgame, you should definitely do so. Try to trade off as much material as possible. Rook c8, activating the rook. Now at some point you have to unpin with white in this position. Rook d3. Rook c1 check, first in between check before trading the queens. King h2, queen takes e3, rook takes a3. And now we see this position. You see the engine also evaluates this as a winning endgame for black. This could also be a rook endgame series, but I think it's very suitable for pawn endgames as well. g5, gaining some space on the king side, so that also the king has a path to come into the game. You know, in endgames, always king activity is very important. Try to activate your king as fast as possible, if possible. So my opponent also tries to activate his king with king g3, which is a correct play. King g7 coming into the center, king g4, and rook c4 check. You try to restrict the king from entering the position even further. Now he has to go back. Rook f4 check, he has to go back to g3. And now you can approach again with the king. Very interesting here in this position. I was trying to win this pawn here. Because obviously if you win this pawn, then these pawns are just blocking each other and you have to connect the passed pawns basically. So this should be winning. So I tried to approach here with the king and then at some point maybe win this pawn, if my opponent lets me. King h2, and now I didn't really problem is if you just approach then something like g4, you have to go back, and then the position is still winning, but it's a little bit more difficult. So after king h2, I found this move which I think is very nice. Rook e4, simplifying, attacking the pawn directly. If the rook moves, you're just winning the pawn. So basically forcing white to trade off the rooks. And now we reach this position, which I think is very interesting. Black is up a pawn. And we have this very strange combination of pawns here on the e file. I think first of all, if you let the engine calculate, it doesn't find the win, but in the end it says that it is winning, which I think is interesting. g4, best defense for white. Problem is white at some point will win this pawn. The king is quite close here, and the black king can't protect the pawn anymore. So you have to give up this pawn at some point, but you try to give it up at the right moment so that you can basically win this game. King f7, now you basically, everything is blocked on the king side. Now you try to come over to the queen side. King g2, he also does the same. King e7, king f2, king d7, king e3, and now you know that you're going to lose this pawn eventually. King c6, king takes e4, and now you've lost the pawn. But the interesting thing is that after king b5, the black king is way more active, and this is one of the most important things in endgames, especially pawn endgames. King activity is just key. The king is also you could say it's in the center of the board, but activity also means what can you actually attack with the king, and black is way closer to the pawns than white, and you have to be careful. You still control these squares, but the white king might come in here at some point. You need to be a little bit careful, but it's no problem. Black is winning in this position. King d4, and now b6, controlling the c5 square so that the white king can never enter, and then you have time to pick up these pawns. I'm going to show you quickly what happens if you immediately go for the pawn, which is a mistake, and it actually loses the game on the spot after king c5. King takes pawn, and now first I thought in this game when I calculated this that white is winning with king d6, but that's actually not the case. King takes b4, king takes e6, a5, king f7, and now both pawns actually walk. a4, e6, a3, black is also fast with his pawn, e7, a2, e8 queen, a1 queen, and now we have this very nice fork. You could also force a triple repetition, or you can just pick up the h pawn, and now this is a queen endgame with 2 pawns each. This is a draw. I don't think any... You can try to play it on, but I think this is basically drawn. At some point, each player can force a 3-fold repetition with the queen quite easily, because there is basically nothing to block the checks here. So this is interesting. After king takes a3, you can't immediately win the pawn, but very interesting, you can play b5 here. And I'm going to show you why. King a4, now you at some point try to win the pawn and let the other pawns walk. Now king d6. King takes b5. And after king takes b5, it seems like the same position occurred as before, with the one small difference that the king has now captured the b pawn on b5 instead of b4. But this detail is actually very important in this situation, because after king takes e6, a5, king f7, a4, the pawns walk, and afterwards white wins with a check because the king is here instead of here. Very small detail. King walks, queen a8, and the queen is stopping the pawns at some point. The queen gives itself up, and you win these 2 pawns, or you just checkmate the black king, which is very, very nice tactic. So I just want to show you why you can't immediately go for the pawn. Again, quickly, king c5, then you take the pawn, and now b5. You give up the pawn this way, and then you queen with check and win the game. So this is why king a4 would have been a blunder to immediately go for the pawns, because now white is the one who is more active and winning. So you can't play it like that. You have to first play this b6 move instead of going for the pawns, which is also a Zugzwang situation, because now you're kind of threatening to go in here and win this pawn, or you can go in here and win this pawn. So to prevent both of these ideas, you actually have to play king c3 here with white, control this square so the king can't enter here. But now the king can enter an a4, king b2 basically forced, and now a5. You try to trade off one of the pawns, b takes on a5, b takes on a5, also to lose another tempo, because now the pawn is again attacked. King a2 basically only move, king b5, king b2. I quickly show you what happens if white goes into the opposition, king b3. Then you have a4 check, king has to go back, and then you basically opposition him. You win this e pawn, and now this is also very interesting. King d4, king takes. When you let your pawn fall in this position, you have this very nice barrier, which is not necessary, but I think it's very nice to illustrate that the edge pawn is definitely a disadvantage here, and the e pawn is definitely an advantage. King a6, and now the pawn can just walk a4, king c6. You can just shield him off as well, just so he loses another tempo. It's not always necessary in each variation, but just that you again see the motive here. You basically shield him into the corner. e3, king a8, e2, a7, e1 queen, and he's not stalemate because he can still move to his h-pawn luckily, and then you checkmate him very nicely from the corner. So this is what would have happened after king b3. King b2 is also an alternative, but then you just play a4 anyway. You just create this very nice barrier here. It's also always a Zugzwang situation. He really doesn't have any moves. king c3, king c5, king d3, king d5, and now you finally, after the whole maneuvering around, you win the pawn, and he wins you 8 pawn, but again it's very nasty. He tries to go away, king c5, you don't let him. You just try to shield him into the corner. e5, king b7. Now, you could have also shielded him again with this maneuver here in this variation as well. This is basically what we've seen before. Or you can just push the pawn, as in the game e5, king b7, e4, a4, e3, a5, e2, a6, e1 queen, a7, and you have check, king e7 check, king b8, king d6. I think there are other ways to win this game as well, but king d6 very aesthetically pleasing. I think if a1, if a8 queen, then you just checkmate him. So basically the most resilient defense is a8 knight, defending the square where the queen could checkmate, but just king c6. Again, Zugzwang situation, you now have to move the knight, and now you're getting checkmated. I think very interesting, this whole variation that just started with this move here, rook e4, trading off the rooks and sacrificing your pawn here on e4, and then you can just activate your king and at some point trade off the pawns and get this very active endgame here, which is winning for black. One key takeaway message I think is always to look for pawns that you can give up to get a more active position with the king, and Zugzwang is also something in pawn endgames that you always have to be very careful about, otherwise you're just getting in trouble. I hope you liked this pawn endgame video. Write into the comments, leave a comment on what you want to see more of on the channel, endgame series or strategy series or maybe opening theory, or the games that you want to see. Check out my Twitch where I stream Macabellum, Rocket League and chess live a couple times a week, and check out my Instagram. See you in the next video.